1.3 million Americans have recovered. Sadly, more than 133,000 Americans have lost their lives, and our sympathies are with all of the impacted families. And while we mourn with those who mourn, because of what the American people have done, because of the extraordinary work of our healthcare workers around the country, we are encouraged that the average fatality rate continues to be low and steady. And at days earlier this week was actually 90% lower than at the height of this pandemic. Again, it's a credit to the sacrifices the American people have made, to the extraordinary work that our healthcare workers are doing. And we pledge this task force, working in partnership with governors all across the country, is going to continue to work our hearts out 24 hours a day to continue to keep our losses low. In just a few moments, Dr. Deborah Birx will outline the data that we're seeing around the country. We're tracking literally state by state, county by county. But as she will describe in a moment, we're actually seeing early indications of a percent of positive testing flattening in Arizona and Florida and Texas. Governors in each of those states have taken strong steps to flatten the curve. And again, as Dr. Birx will describe, we're beginning to see early indications that positivity is flattening. And in Arizona and Florida, we are beginning to see declining numbers of emergency room visits as well. We believe the takeaway from this for every American, particularly in those states that are impacted, is keep doing what you're doing, because we're starting to see the first indications that, as we were able to do in the Northeast, as we were able to do in New Orleans and Louisiana and Michigan and other places around the country, we're putting into practice those mitigation efforts, and we're beginning to see indications that they are having a good effect. We are focused on the states where more than half of the new cases have arisen: Texas, Arizona, Florida, and California, and have received encouraging reports even through this morning. Strong supplies of PPE in hospitals. Hospital capacity remains strong. The one need that we did hear from governors across the region is for personnel. And over the last week, working through FEMA, the Department of Defense, and HHS, we've been processing requests to deploy over 1,070 doctors and nurses and medical personnel. At this point, roughly 525 doctors and nurses are on the ground in Arizona, California, and Texas. And we're processing a request from Florida for an additional amount. We've made it very clear, as we, if you'll recall, we deployed at the President's direction active duty military medical personnel to New York, to New Jersey, to Connecticut, to Michigan, to Louisiana, and we're in the process of doing that again, just to make sure that that those dedicated doctors and nurses and healthcare workers have the relief that they need as we see cases rising in various communities across the Sun Belt, and we'll continue to work that. We had a conference call yesterday with the nation's governors. We are in the process of continuing to send every week detailed county by county summaries, analysis, and recommendations to governors that are being implemented and well received. We also are issuing renewed guidance on preservation and reuse of PPE. Again, what we're hearing, and not just speaking to governors, but talking directly to hospitals, is that, frankly, because of the historic effort that President Trump implemented to spin up hundreds of millions of supplies of gloves and masks and face shields, and as well as the construction of ventilators. We now have 59,000 ventilators in our supplies. PPE, we hear, remains very strong, but we're encouraging healthcare workers to begin now to use some of the best practices that we learned in other parts of the country to preserve and to reuse the PPE supplies. So our focus is to make sure our states have everything they need when they need it, and we're working closely with all the governors to make that a reality. But what brings us to the Department of Education is, as we as we see to the needs of our states, as we focus on the health care of the American people, we're working to reopen America and to reopen America's schools. Yesterday, President Trump convened a summit of education leaders and health officials at the White House. And as the president made clear yesterday, it's time. It's time for us to get our kids back to school. And the summit yesterday gave us an opportunity to outline and to learn what we might be able to do that. In just a few moments, I'm going to ask Secretary DeVos to talk about the approach the Department of Education is taking to assisting local communities and states in bringing their schools back online. And also we'll hear from Dr. Bob Redfield, who has been literally since early in this pandemic providing guidance to schools, and will be issuing additional guidance next week. I wouldn't want to pass the opportunity, though, not just as vice president, but as someone who's been married to a school teacher now for 35 years, just to say thank you to all the teachers out there. From early in this pandemic, and teachers learned how to do the distance teaching and did a remarkable job, oftentimes having to care for their own families and make sure their own children's studies were happening. So to all of our America's teachers, we say thank you. We also want to say thank you to the parents who had to step in and become educators for all of their kids. It's really been remarkable when you see what our kids have been able to accomplish during this difficult time. But what we heard again yesterday from education officials and what we heard from the American Academy of Pediatrics, it's absolutely essential that we get our kids back into classroom for in-person learning. We can't let our kids fall behind academically, but it's important that the American people remember that for children that have mental health issues, for special needs children, for nutrition, for children in communities facing persistent poverty, the school is the place where they receive all those services. And so this is not just simply about making sure our kids are learning and they're advancing academically, but for their mental health, for their well-being, for their physical health, for nutrition. We've got to get our kids back to school. And as you heard the president yesterday, and even again this morning, we're absolutely determined to work in partnership with our states to give the guidance for states and communities to be able to safely reopen our schools. The CDC will be issuing new guidance next week, part of a 5-part series of recommendations that will give all new tools to our schools. But what Dr. Redfield made clear yesterday, I'm sure he'll make clear again today, is we're here to help. We don't want federal guidance to be a substitute for state and local laws and rules and guidance. We're here to assist with the shared objective that I think is shared by every parent in America, which is we want to get our kids back. We want to get them back in the classroom. We want to get our teachers back in the front of those classrooms. We got to get our kids learning in person once again. As Congress is still in recess, but we'll gather again soon, we already are in discussions about additional potential support, although we were able to remind governors that $13.3 billion is available in the CARES Act for states to be able to assist them as they roll out and restart schools.
You know, from a social standpoint, I'm going to weigh in on this real quick. From a social standpoint, I understand that our children need to be put back in classrooms to be able to learn to interact with other children. That way they'll know how to deal with various situations, hands on hand, as far as eye-to-eye contact with other people. Because there's no doubt in the real world, that's how we have to associate with each other. From that perspective, I agree. We need to make sure that our children are coherent in these areas. That way they can adjust once they become adults to be able to do what they need to do to become productive citizens to society. But on the other hand, whenever it comes to teaching methods, and whenever it comes to teaching tools, I have learned more in the past 3.5, now going on 4 years, maybe in 5. I have learned more from my instrument device pertaining to my telephone and having unlimited text and talk to be able to ask Google questions, ask Siri questions, basically have my own personal library, my own personal encyclopedia, my own personal this, my own personal that. I have learned more from my telephone than the years that I spent in school. And I said years that I spent in school. I have learned more by operating and learning to operate my telephone. I think it has become essential. It's imperative that we make adjustments for our children in this regard, because the handling of social media as well as interaction with the internet has come into the existence of our everyday routine lives almost as essential as electricity or water or some of the other essentials that we have to have. In other words, it's become a utility to have a telephone, to have a computer telephone. Not just a telephone, but a computer telephone. Believe it or not, you still have people out there that are operating under the influences of just a telephone. The telephone may have a few smart technologies to it pertaining to your flip phones, but by and large, you got people out there that don't want to be exposed to the modern 21st century technology. They want to be in the dark. They want to remain in a cave. They do not want to be exposed to this because they have superstitious ideals that are lagging and falling behind. So I propose that our government open up some sort of a high-tech data teaching, I don't know what the proper word would be, maybe school or atmosphere or some sort of a culture playing program, to the point that these instruments can be either sold to the parents pertaining to your laptops and your telephones, or possibly even given to them under certain guidelines and circumstances. There's no doubt you can't just give out everybody an Obama phone, because whenever you do, you're going to have people that's going to take advantage of that, and they're going to waste that particular entity. But if you'll set it up on some sort of reward system to where, okay, we're going to give you this now, and if you can prove that you're responsible and adaptable and you make the grade, we'll go from giving you this to giving you this. And if you make the grade on that, then we'll keep you updated on the latest devices out there. That way you have capability of learning and achieving the things that you need to learn. Whenever it comes to social adaptation towards people, being able to socially adapt, believe it or not, whenever I was a child growing up out in the country and people was poor and they drove old beaters and people didn't have reliable automobiles, and we didn't have computers, and we didn't have microwaves, and we didn't have the things that we have today, nobody had to show me how to interact with another person my age, regardless whether I was 3, 4, 5, or 10 years old. I still remember interacting in the streets of Round Lake up in the northern parts of Illinois as a child whenever I was just a young tot. Couldn't have been no more than 4 or 5 years old. Not only was I interacting with my brothers and my mother and my father and our grandmother and our grandfather and the kin folks that would come and visit, but I was interacting with my own personal friends. I had my own personal friends that I liked and I wanted to hang around. One of them, I had a girlfriend, had a little red wagon, pulled her around everywhere. And every day at the same time, the ice cream truck man would come, and my mother would be sure and give me 10 cents. 5 cents was for me, and 5 cents was for my girlfriend. And I would always buy either my girlfriend or my friend an ice cream cone to share it with myself. So nobody had to show me how to interact on a social level, even at the age of 3 or 4 years old. You just pick these things up automatically. I mean, if you watch TV, if you got a computer and you see how other people do it, it's kind of like riding a bicycle. Well, if they rode a bicycle that way, obviously I must need to ride the bicycle the same way. You don't see people riding a bicycle setting in the opposite direction. Everybody that rides a bicycle sets in a forward position. That way they can see where they're going. I have yet to see anybody ride a bicycle or try to ride a bicycle unless they was trying to do some sort of a specialty act, some sort of a specialty performance towards turning their bodies around backwards and trying to ride the bicycle in the opposite direction that the bicycle needed to go in. So obviously, whenever you watch people do things, you understand, well, this must be the proper form and the proper way of doing it. So you really don't need nobody to show you how to do things if you got good common knowledge. It's kind of like tying your shoes. I can remember the first time that I tied my shoes. I thought it was a great achievement at the age of 3 whenever I learned how to tie my own shoes. I was doing something at that time towards learning how to achieve something. I didn't no longer have to have nobody tie my own shoes. Somebody sat down and showed me, look, you take the little bow, you put it in one hand, you take the other knot, you go around the bow, you take that, you pull it through the knot, and you take both bows and you tie them both together, and that creates a performance of tying your shoes. Once I learned how to tie my shoes, I didn't have to be retaught how to tie my shoes twice, or the third time, or the fourth time. The same way with a bicycle. Once I learned how to ride a bicycle, I learned how to ride a bicycle. I knew how to ride a bicycle. I may have had a lot of boops and fouls and troublesome times towards running into people or running into things, but I learned how to ride a bicycle. Or if at the time we had skateboards, in which there was some skateboards at that time, but if I was a skateboard rider, I would have learned how to have ridden or rode a skateboard. If I was out on the oceanfront property and we done a lot of surfing, I'm sure I would have learned how to have rode a surfboard. Once you learn something, ordinarily you don't forget it. The point that I'm trying to make is this. Whenever it comes to social reacting, after you learn how to talk, respond, yes, no, thank you, please, could I have some more? No, no sir, no ma'am. Once you learn these common factors, the rest of it will come naturally to you towards how to communicate with other people. Looks like we may have a storm blowing up. Or maybe it's an Amber Alert, I don't know. I'm going to unplug it for right now because of me doing this video. Sorry. Plug it back up. I think the government is failing the American people by not issuing out some sort of a program to each state, to each county, to the school system, in involving parents, in involving their children, to be able to operate these documentation devices that we call cellular phones, that we call Android phones, that we call communication devices. Because in these communication devices, like I said, I have learned more since I have gotten a smartphone just within the past 5 years than I ever thought about during the whole segment of me going to elementary school and then graduate school. Never did finish graduate school. I was a dropout. I regret that. I wish that I would at least got my GED. Never went to college. But because of the smartphone technology, it has set me up on a level to where now I can communicate with those that do have high school diplomas, that do have degrees hanging on their walls. Because I can function with them, because I can correspond with them in ways that I couldn't correspond 15 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. Now, since I've got the smartphone technology, I have learned to adapt to using that type of lingo to be able to communicate with people to where they can understand what I'm talking about, vice versa. So, to me, our government system that Mr. Pence here wants to say that we're for the people, that we're not just left alone. To me, our government is failing us because our children is our future. And without our children, this country will cease to exist. And that's that way with any country. I don't care if it's an American country. I don't care if it's a South American country. I don't care if it's Russia or China or Cuba or Australia or England or Germany or wherever. You have to keep your children informed on a day-to-day level, to where it's a constant learning system. It's almost like an evolving ball that continues to roll and roll and roll. And as this ball is rolling, you're supposed to evolve with the ball rolling. You're supposed to learn. You're supposed to adapt. Because I'm pretty convinced that probably in less than 10 years from now, and it may be even a lot shorter than that, maybe like 5 years from now, eventually the post office service will no longer cease to exist as far as actually sending out a letter, unless it's a certified letter, to a person's mailbox. By and large, I believe that things will be done electronically, digitally, through your various applications on your phone. And basically the only thing that's going to be operating will be your bigger trucks towards UPS and FedEx, towards actually sending out packages. I'm not saying that there won't be certified mail. There'll be certified mail pertaining to our court systems and pertaining to legal documents that can't be jeopardized in a digital format. There'll probably always be that to some degree. But as we evolve, as we grow, as we change, We must change with the system, and if we don't, our children will be left behind. And it's not necessarily because we didn't put them to school, it's because we didn't give them the proper tools so that they could evolve. You know, you're never going to learn how to ride a bicycle if you don't get on the damn thing and ride it. You're never going to learn how to be a skateboard rider if you've never had a skateboard. You got to have the tool or the opportunity to operate the tool to say, you know what, I can ride a bicycle. There's people over in Africa, grown-ups, 40, 50, 60 years old, that cannot tie a pair of shoes. And the reason why that they can't tie a pair of shoes is because they've never owned a pair of shoes to tie. You may think that that's crazy, but I'm telling you the truth. You got to have the opportunity for people to learn. And if people can't learn from the opportunity, how else are they going to learn? Oh, you can sit and watch somebody riding a bicycle all day long. Well, I see how that's done. But whenever you're a youngster at the age of 2 or 3, you think you're just going to be able to jump up and jump on a big bicycle and take off without somebody guiding you through it and teaching you? Not only that, but you have to have the bicycle to learn. You can't do it in your imagination and feel, I mean, I watch people every day fly an airplane, but that doesn't mean that I can fly an airplane. I watch people every day on TV do certain things, but that doesn't mean that I can do them. I have a general idea towards how to do them. I have a general idea towards how to fly an airplane. You know, you got that little stick, you push it forward and it goes down, you pull it back, it goes up. Then you got all these other instrument controls that does certain things. I have a general idea, but as far as putting me in a 747 and flying and landing 500 people successfully without injury would be slim to none, unless I have a simulator or I've actually been in the cockpit of an airplane. I think you understand the concept of what I'm talking about here. Our children is our most valuable asset that our country has. And without children, we do not have a country. But we have to have taught children. The children has to be taught. And the way that you teach them is that you give them the tool to learn from.
Across the country. At the present moment, we learned yesterday that only 1.5% of those funds has been drawn down by states, and we encourage the governors to take advantage of that. Our objectives, as I said, are to save lives, meet the needs of our states and their healthcare workers, protect the most vulnerable, and safely reopen America and safely reopen our schools. And the good news is we are reopening America. The jobs report last Thursday spoke for itself, nearly 5 million jobs created. And I can tell you, evidence all around the country is that the American people are finding a way to do their part, to put the health of their neighbors first, even while we all find a way to get back to work, to worship, and to school. And we all have a role to play to slow the spread, to protect the most vulnerable, and to safely reopen our country and our schools. And so I would just close before I turn the podium over to Dr. Burks for her report, just simply to say thank you to the American people. Thank you for what you've done so far. Thank you for the way you've put the health and well-being of not just family members and friends, but strangers, people you didn't even know first. And we just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. Keep heeding the guidance of state and local authorities. Practice good hygiene. Wash your hands. Wear a mask wherever state and local authorities determine it's indicated, or wear a mask where you can't engage in social distancing. This is the role each of us can continue to play, and we're seeing some early indications in some of the most impacted states that Americans are doing just that. So we want to encourage you on and tell you that we're going to continue to do our part. And I'm just absolutely confident, just as we proved when this pandemic was striking so deeply in the Northeast, when it was striking in the Louisiana and in Michigan. The American people know what needs to be done, and we know we can do it. And we flattened the curve before. We slowed the spread before, and we can do it again. But we've got to all do our part, and we'll do it together. With that, Dr. Deborah Burks, and then we'll get a report.
Once more, yes, I agree. We have to do our part. But when you have a group of people out there that is basically a lost generation of kids that are now teenagers that have been raised up parentless, without parents. They feel like that the world has abandoned them. They feel like that nobody cares about them or loves them. They're grown up in some of the remote areas in Chicago or New York or Atlanta or Houston or other major metropolitan areas, to the point that they have struggled with food, they have struggled with good housing, they have struggled with being able to perform as some of the gifted people, to the point that they had to drop out of school. That was my situation. I had to drop out of school because of the environment that I was raised up in, towards my father using brutal tactics that was actually fighting against my learning capabilities. To where if my father would have been more lenient in his brutality ways, I think eventually I would have caught on of learning how to read and write at a young age. But whenever you're constantly worried about being knocked in the head, or having your hair pulled out of your head, or you slapped down like a grown man whenever you're just 10, 11, 12 years old, it has a tendency of affecting your learning capabilities. Well, not only does children be affected in environments like that, but they also get affected in other environments where there's too much trash, not enough this, not enough that. The school system is broke, and the teachers have went out of their way towards making adjustments for the classroom, towards buying things out of their own pockets and doing this and doing that. You have beautiful children out there that has some of the greatest minds in the world. But whenever you're failing to give them the tools to operate and to perform, you wind up having slums. And it's these slums that are infesting even the good people in the good areas now, to the point that it's bringing us all down the tubes. Why is this occurring? Is it because of the tactics that the teachers are using? Possibly, but I still refer back to the tools. You got to give them the tools. You got to give them the ability to know what to use to be able to learn from it. Kind of like your video games. You know children are attracted to video games. What a better way to teach a child is to teach a child through a video game. Turn it into a learning experience to where they can learn early how to spell and how to read. That's how you attack these type of problems. That's how you attack all these housing industry problems, to where we have the homeless that's out here living around on the streets that don't have the opportunity of being able to do any better. That's how you attack the problem. You just don't talk about it. You actually do something about it. And that's where this government, I believe, have failed we the people, because it did not listen to the people. It did not listen to the needs of the people. And because it didn't listen to the needs of the people, look at where we are. We are ranking second to none in comparison to other countries now that are boosting in their education skills, that are boosting in their labor skills, that are boosting in their medical skills, that are boosting in their agriculture skills. We have to do better. That's the reason why I reflect back to the first 4 chapters of Revelations, where the Holy Spirit is speaking to the 7 churches, for I've not found thy works perfect yet. To go back and do thy first works over again. Whenever God comes back, he's not coming back for a depleted, immoral church. He's coming back for a strong church. He's coming back. The bridegroom is coming back for a strong bride, not a weak bride, not a depleted bride, not a perverted bride, but a strong bride. We have to remember to keep him first in our survival methods if we're going to survive and prosper.
From Admiral Giroir before we move on to other reports. Dr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. If I could have the first slide, please. And I know some of you do watch what I wear, so I'm wearing this specially today. This came from the Salt River Tribe. I just want to, mask can be a fashion statement. And I want to thank the Salt River Tribe. It was a real pleasure to be out and speaking to individuals around the United States about the issues that they're facing with COVID-19, to be able to meet with communities, hospital personnel, African American communities, Hispanic communities, and our Pride tribal nations. That was a privilege last week. I want to start with Arizona.
I want to stop right there and weigh in on what she's talking about as far as different ethnic groups and different tribes. One of the biggest reasons why the Native American tribes out west and northwest have suffered so severely is because they did not have proper teaching, they did not have tools, they did not have people that cared about their influences that they was going through at that time. That's the reason why that the suicide rate and the poverty rate is so high amongst these places in South Dakota, North Dakota, and out in Wyoming and even Oklahoma and New Mexico and places like that, is because people have lost the will to survive because they feel like that they have hit a hopelessness state in their lives to the point that what difference does it make? It's no longer worth striving towards trying to do better. Once more, whenever you take away that reward system that gives people that reason to want to do better, you're going to wind up having a calamity. And that's exactly what has occurred here. For I have not found thy works perfect yet. Go back and redo what you have not done proper. That's what the Word of God is saying in the book of life in the first 4 chapters of Revelations. Now, whether or not you want to read it, understand it, and believe it is going to be another factor. But that's the way that I have interpreted where we are right now in 2020, in the 21st century, towards all these problems that have just absolutely astronomically enveloped our communities and enveloped our country.
Just to pick up where the Vice President left off, that orange line is the number of tests performed and the blue line is the test positivity. Now this is at the level of the state. And Arizona does have 3 counties that we're tracking very closely. Obviously, you know, the largest one being Phoenix and Maricopa County. But this does show that the blue line, which is a 7-day average, and thank you to the data team for these wonderful slides, the 7-day average is showing some flattening, and they find that encouraging. Also equally encouraging at this point, because we know that the test positivity rate is the first thing to increase. And we're hoping that it heralds a stability in Arizona of at least reaching a plateau in their curve. The red line represents the emergency room visits for any of the COVID-like symptoms. And this is also an early indicator, and we find that encouraging. The next slide does show the counties that we're tracking, obviously the largest county being Maricopa County with the largest number of infections, but clearly there's issues in Yuma and Pima. The Vice President mentioned the weekly reports that go to governors. This is what the report looks like. Of course, they're full-side pages. This is Alaska's. On the front page is our interpretation of what we're seeing relevant to their epidemic, with specific recommendations related to where we see them as far as being in a danger zone. They are coded by yellow and red. And it follows that they see everything you're seeing on that first report in boxes, warning boxes, and then each of the counties are represented so that they have in one place 5 pages from the White House and task force that summarizes what we're seeing, and that goes out weekly. Next slide, please. This looks at Florida, and you can see in the same way, the red line, early suggestions of decreasing emergency room visits for the symptoms of COVID, and some stability starting in that blue line, hoping that heralds a stability in the number of daily reported cases. We also understand that we went through a holiday weekend, and holiday weekends can impact data on both ends. Under-reporting through the weekend, and then catch-up reporting on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday after holiday weekend. Next.
I'm going to end right here on what she's talking about as far as these graphics that obviously are changing on a day-to-day level. First of all, we know what is causing the graphics to change. We identify towards the clusters of people coming together in large communities, especially indoors, that is causing these clusters to go up. Thank God that the medical industry has now learned more about this disease in knowing how to attack it towards saving lives. So the fatality rate isn't near as high as what it was whenever the beginning phases of all this 3 months ago. But the fact of the matter is, we're still dealing with this pandemic. And not only are we dealing with it, but the world is dealing with it. Just as of recently, a day ago, they have shut down Australia into another lockdown mode. In other words, the only time that you're allowed to go out is to get bare essentials. And the majority of their restaurants and their grocery stores have bare shelves because people have made a run for the food. We are not even close to being out of the woods on this coronavirus, even though they have learned to use methods to be able to attack its method in how it attacks. But whenever it comes to an actual antidote or some sort of cure-all, a silver bullet, we're still very, very far from that. People need to wisen up. People need to wake up. In emerging in not only this particular situation, but in other situations that has hindered the American growth towards where we should be in 2020. I just want to say good luck to all of us, especially those out in the Arizona and these harder hit areas that are now spiking the way that they are, because to wear a mask in regular 75, 80, 85, even 90-degree weather is one thing, but to have to wear a mask whenever it's 110, 112, 115 degrees outside is just unbearable to even think about. It's unbearable. Good luck to all of us as we're all struggling and evolving and growing and learning in these survival issues. Shalom.